You're in a cash game. It's a game full of passive players, at least 3 or 4 players who will call at least 2 streets with middle pair or worse and not think twice about it. You isolate pre-flop and you get one caller. It's the same guy who called your raise with king 9 offsuit from middle position, and he's been doing that all night. The flop comes ace 9 4 rainbow. You have pocket kings. You bet. He calls. Turn is a 3. No draws complete. You bet again. He calls again. You've built a pot. Now you know he's got a 9. You know he's not folding. River is a complete blank, a 7. And right there, right in that moment where the pot is the largest and his calling range is almost locked in, you bet 60% of the pot instead of pot. Maybe even less. Here's why that's the wrong number. The pot size river bet against a calling station only needs to be good roughly about 50% of the times to be profitable. But you don't need it to be a bluff. You have the best hand. His calling threshold doesn't care about your sizing. Studies of passive live players show that their river fold frequency against pot-sized bets barely move compared to half-pot bets. We're talking about single digits of difference in fold rate, sometimes even less. He was calling a pot-sized bet with that 9. He was calling a bet that was 30% bigger than what you sent in. You left real money in the table, not because he would have folded, he wouldn't have, but because you flinched. That flinch is the leak. Not a cooler, not a bad beat. A decision made in the last 5 seconds of the hand that you already won that quietly cost you session after session. By the end of this video, you will have one rule and one drill that changes how you size your river bets against passive callers permanently. A framework, the kind that you can run at the table under 10 seconds before you put the chips in. This is Vinton Poker, precision in, profits out. And the topic of today's short talk is the river is where passive tables print, and you've been checking it down. I'm Vinton. I specialize in one thing, transforming everyday players into highly profitable, exploitative forces at the live table. If you're tired of break-even sessions and are ready to engineer a consistent income stream, then you're in the right place. Let's dive in. If you keep sizing down on the rivers against players who are calling everything, you keep paying a tax on your own good hands. You built the pot, send the bill, get paid. Most players at passive tables think they're winning because they're not losing big. But checking down rivers and sizing small against stations is a slow bleed that never shows up as one catastrophic decision. It just quietly kills your win rate, hand after hand, session after session, until the gap between what you earned and what you were owed becomes the story of your entire year. The flinch I just described isn't random. It has a structure, and once you see the structure, you can't unsee it. The delusion runs like this. You believe that betting large on the river reads as a bluff-sized bet, that a pot-sized bet signals strength so loudly that a reasonable player will fold. So you scale down. You go 60%. You go half. You go small enough to feel safe. And that word, safe, is doing a lot of damage to your win rate. The problem is that you're not at the table with reasonable players. You're at a passive table. These are not the same ecosystems. A reasonable player folds to pot-sized pressure. A station doesn't process your sizing as a threat. They process it as a price. And their price sensitivity on the river is close to 0. You're applying bluff deterrence logic to a value betting situation. You're treating your own strong hand like a liability. That is not caution. That is a structural error. That is a leak. If the pot is $100 and you bet 60, your opponent needs to be good roughly 27% of the times to break even on that call. If you bet pot 100 into 100, he needs to be good 33% of the times. 6 percentage points separates those two sizing. Against a player who calls with any pair, any draw, any piece of the board, 6 percentage points does not move the needle on this decision. He's not tanking the bigger bet and finding a fold. He's snapping it off either way. But the difference in what you extract is not abstract. $60 versus $100. And if you get 6 legitimate 3-street value spots in a session where the average pot is $80, the difference between sizing correctly and flinching is over $190 in a single 4-hour session. Not from running better, not from making more hands, from removing one behavioral error on the river with hands you already had. Your pre-flop job at a passive table is to build pots with hands that dominate their calling ranges. You isolate bigger. You 3-bet for value bigger than instinct says is necessary because you're charging admission to a pot where you plan to extract on 3 streets. If you limp in or min raise and let 3 players see the flop for nothing, you already shrunk the riverbed before the hand even started. The pot you're working with on the river is a direct function of how aggressively you price the entry. Small pot, small river bet, small extraction. That's the chain, and it all starts pre-flop. The rake reality at a passive live table reinforces this. Once pots reach a certain size, you hit the rake cap and the rake stops scaling, which means in big pots, you're playing a larger percentage of the total money without paying proportionally more in fees. That's the economy of passive tables. Big pots, value hands, 3 streets. Small pots with thin bluffs are the wrong game entirely. You're not looking for fold equity here. You're looking for call equity. And you have it every single time you have the best hand against someone who cannot find the fold button. And if you think you've been avoiding this mistake, keep watching. The 3-bet for value piece is part of the same system as river sizing. At a passive table, 3-bet bluffs are a near direct destruction of capital. Their pre-flop fold frequency is close to 0. The 3-bet at a passive table is a value tool. You do it with hands that want larger pots, not with hands that need folds to profit. Stop applying fold equity logic to a no-fold equity environment. That adjustment gets punished every single time. So run this 2-question drill before every river bet at a passive table. It takes under 10 seconds. Question 1. Can I name 2 or 3 worse hands that this specific player will call with right now, given the board and the action? Not worse hands in general. This player, this board, this action. If the answer is yes, and at a passive table it almost always is, you have a value bet. The sizing question then becomes a simple one. Bet as large as their calling threshold allows, which at a passive table is almost always larger than your instinct says it is. Question 2. Does my bet size change whether he calls or not? Be honest about his profile. If you go from 60% to a pot size bet, does this specific player, the one who called your raise with King 9, the one who's been calling 2 streets all night, does he overfold to the river to a bigger bet? If the answer is no, and it usually is, then the smaller size is a pure gift to him. You are voluntarily leaving money in the middle with no strategic reason. One way to estimate this value bet size is to ask yourself how much would you have bet to get them to fold their value. If there is a larger number that you think they will fold to, let's say 2x pot, then you can be sure to get value by betting as much as 1.5x pot or even 1.75x pot. If there is not a number you can conceive of that they would fold to, perhaps this is a great time to just go for it all. A nice big jam. That's the PIPO Decision Engine applied to river sizing. Precision in, you have diagnosed the opponent, you have named the worst hands he will call with, you've confirmed his range doesn't tighten to size. Profits out. You send the correct number, not the comfortable one, the correct one. The patient player at the passive table is not the one who waits for the nuts. The patient player is the one who refuses to spew between good spots and refuses to check back the river when the pot is built and the bill is due. When the table is passive and the action is slow, there will be a pull to manufacture something, to run a creative bluff, to float with nothing, to make something happen. That's how money gets torched in games where your edge is already enormous. The edge at a passive table is patience plus extraction. ISO bigger, 3-bet for value bigger, bet 3 streets with your strong hands, river, size up, they call, you collect, and repeat. The difficulty is not intellectual. You already know you should be betting bigger. The difficulty is behavioral. Overriding the flinch, the compromise, the defensive sizing that feels measured and costs you real money. One of my students who ran the League Hunter diagnostic, which you can find at audit.vintonpoker.com, he found that river sizing on value hands has been costing him more per session than every other decision category combined. Not his bluffs, not his folds, his value bets. He adjusted his sizing, same tables, same opponents, different results. That is what finding the leak actually looks like. If you suspect something similar is happening in your game, the diagnostic is at audit.vintonpoker.com. It'll show you exactly where your behavioral patterns are bleeding into your numbers. Here's a question for you to ponder. The last time you sized down on the river against a player you knew wasn't folding, what was your reasoning? What were you protecting? Think about that question honestly. Tell me your answers in the comments. I read them all. If this video gave you something to think about in your game, give it a like and share it with someone else who's also serious about crushing just like you. And subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'm Vinton, and I'll see you in the next one.